right, please?
You are already.
Okay.
So I'm gonna do the countdown, and if you can just give a few seconds so everyone just gets into the room. So we'll be live in 3, 2, 1.
Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome back. It's a pleasure to see so many of you returning for our second and final day. Thank you for being with us yesterday and for the energy and honesty you brought to the discussions and to the exercise. We covered a great deal of ground, and today we put that to work. For anyone joining us for the first time today, I'm Anjani Kapoor, Head of Policy at Sanitation and Water for All. A few quick housekeeping points as we had yesterday. Please introduce yourself and also write your name, organization, and the country that you're joining from in the chat box. If you need an interpretation, click the interpretation globe button at the bottom of the screen and choose your language, English or French. And if you have a question at any point during the 90 minutes, please put it in the chat and we'll make sure it reaches our speakers. Next slide, please. So let me start with what we learned from yesterday's exercise. When many of you reviewed your own country's National Adaptation Plan or your nationally determined contribution, where a plan was not yet in place. We had 39 responses from 24 countries, and 3 things stood out. First, water and sanitation are already showing up in climate planning. More than half of you, around 56%, said the priorities are clearly included in your national plans. About a quarter said they are partially included, and only a small number said that they were missing altogether. So we see that the foundation is there. What varies, and varies a lot, is the depth of that integration. Second, attention is shifting towards services, not only infrastructure. Many of you reported that your plans addressed the actual delivery of resilient services. But can we stay on the previous slide, please? Thank you. But a good number still lean more towards building infrastructure than towards keeping services running for people over time. Third, and this is the area that needs the most work, gender and inclusion remain uneven throughout in your answers. They appear in many plans at the national level, but almost half of you felt they are only partially addressed or absent. I'm flagging that now because I'll come back to the third point later in the day. Next slide, please. Now, if we step back from the exercise, I would draw 4 messages from all of this. 1, water and sanitation are increasingly recognized as adaptation priorities in national climate planning, as we are seeing in the global frameworks as well. This is real progress. 2, countries are moving beyond infrastructure towards climate resilient service delivery, but clear gaps remain. 3, the dominant priorities across countries are consistent. Drought resilience, water security, climate resilient infrastructure. Some strong, detailed examples came through from countries like Liberia, Malawi, Eswatini, and Nepal, with Liberia already building in the participation of women and young people. So a big shout out to the team there. Thank you for sharing those. For gender and inclusion, as we saw in the previous slide, are still the least consistently integrated, and that is exactly where SWA sees the biggest opportunity for the period ahead. So where we stand today. Today is all about moving from understanding this that we've discussed so far to action. We will begin with shared definition of what climate resilient water and sanitation services actually are, and a framework for putting it into practice. I will then take some time on gender and why it belongs at the center of this agenda. We will then look at heads of state initiatives as a way to drive delivery across government. And we will spend some real time on climate finance, where the money is and why our sector is still underrepresented, and the practical steps to assess it and access it further. But we'll assess it today with an exercise as well. So as yesterday, you will have that hand-on exercise that I was talking about to look at climate finance in your own country. And by the end of today, the aim is simple, that you leave with a clearer sense of how to turn these commitments into funded resilient services at home. So let's get started, and I'll hand over the floor to my colleague, Jose Jesti, who's our Senior Climate Advisor. Over to you, Jose, please.
Thank you very much, Anjani. It's very exciting to be back today, day two. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining this second session. We are excited to kick it off now. So as Anjani was telling us, we are going to focus today on moving from policies that we discussed yesterday into implementation. And we are going to be working with some tools, right? The first one, if I can have the next slide. As we said yesterday, we spent a lot of time for you to get well equipped and understanding the global goal on adaptation, the global climate resilience framework, and the target, right? And today and yesterday already got a little preview of this definition, and we promised that today, as an important tool, we could go into a little bit more detail, right? So we wanted to share SWA contribution to try to move the conversation from policy into implementation by developing precisely this definition that you have on the screen from policy to implementation. The definition and is not only a definition, as you will see, is a response framework as well. This is the result, as we discussed yesterday, of more than 2 years of consultations led by the SWA Climate Task Team. We have brought together governments, development partners, utilities, researchers, and also civil society organizations and climate specialists to bring their expertise into the making of this piece of work that you see. As we discussed yesterday, a first edition was already launched at COP29 in Baku, in Azerbaijan, and last year in Belém, COP30, just a few months ago, we launched an improved version, a refined version that, as I say, is not just now a definition, is a definition plus an implementation framework. Next slide, please. But again, let me be a little bit provocative and start with a simple question. What do we actually mean when we say that water supply systems or sanitation systems are climate resilient? What we believe is that if we had asked this to 20 government colleagues or 20 different organizations up to recently, we could be getting 20 different answers. But that was until recently, and that's what we are trying to change now, because everything has changed since the universal adoption of the global climate resilience framework that we emphasized yesterday, right? And that framework, as we emphasize, it's calling all of you and all the countries to work literally towards climate resilient water supply and climate resilient sanitation. So the moment that all countries have agreed on such target, as you can imagine, we can no longer function with having different understanding on what this means, and a shared understanding, it was really needed. So without a common definition and a common understanding, it becomes very difficult to plan, to finance, to monitor, or to even implement climate resilient services, right? So the purpose of this work is ultimately practical, is to create common language that can support policy development, climate finance, implementation, and monitoring. The next slide, please. The definition itself is clearly ambitious. It recognizes that climate resilient services must be able to anticipate, must be able to respond to cope with, to recover from, to adapt to, and even when possible to transform. So it's a lot of verbs, as you can see, right? To transform in response to climate-related events and threats. But perhaps the most important aspect of our definition is that resilience is not treated separately from sustainable development. Climate resilience is not simply about surviving floods or droughts. It's about maintaining progress towards universal and equitable access to these basic services, right? While paying obviously attention to the most exposed and vulnerable populations. In other words, climate resilience and the human rights agenda are not competing priorities. They are mutually reinforcing objectives. So the definition also recognizes that where appropriate, efforts should be done to minimize emissions and contribute to sustainable development. The next slide. We have a set of principles outlined in the definition paper. Perhaps the easiest way to summarize them is to say that the definition is intended to be universal, applying to all geographies, while remaining obviously flexible enough to be adapted to local realities. There is no single pathway towards climate resilience. There is no silver bullet. What works in a small island in the Pacific may look very different from what it works in a drought-prone region or a growing urban area, of course. The definition is therefore locally led, it's adaptable, and it's evolving. At the same time, it's also transformational, right? Because climate change is increasingly requiring all of us to move beyond business as usual and rethink how services are planned, are financed, and they are delivered. The next slide, please. So probably this slide is the most important one, this and the next one. We're moving now from the definition piece into the implementation part, which is our focus today. And one of the strongest messages that emerged during these 2-year consultations that I'm referring was that resilient infrastructure alone does not create resilient services. A flood resilient treatment plan is important, but if governance is weak, if financing is weak or insufficient, if ecosystems are degraded, or communities are excluded from decision-making, then resilience is going to be very limited. That is why the framework identifies 5 interdependent dimensions, right? The first one is service authorities. We're referring to ministries, regulators, local governments responsible for planning and oversight. Second, we have service providers, right? Utilities, operators, and other actors. Third, we have users and the wider society. And then we have 2 physical dimensions. The water-related ecosystems, which provide the resource upon which services obviously depend. And then we have infrastructure, which obviously enables service delivery. So the key message here is that climate resilient water and climate resilient sanitation services are not just about infrastructure, they are about strengthening an entire system. The next slide. Now we're moving into a practical menu of adaptation options. And here you only have a little preview of what we have in the paper as a full set of menu of options at both national and subnational and local levels, right? At national level, examples that you will find include integrating climate resilience into policies and regulations we discussed yesterday, establishing financing strategies, strengthening coordination mechanisms, and developing climate resilient service standards. For service providers, options include business continuity planning, adaptive management systems, and emergency preparedness. For infrastructure, actions that we have in the document range from incorporating climate resilience into design standards to promoting low emissions and climate resilient infrastructure solutions. For ecosystems, for example, options include integrated water resource management, catchment protection, and nature-based solutions. And for users and communities, actions focus on inclusion, awareness, local knowledge, and participation. That's at the national level. At the local level, you will see when you have the chance that the framework becomes even more practical. So we move into areas such as early warning systems, contingency planning, upgrading vulnerable infrastructure, groundwater protection, participatory risk mapping, and community stewardship. Importantly, this is not intended as a checklist. It's a menu from which colleagues in countries, you can select and adapt the interventions that make sense within your own context. The next slide. Let me conclude now with why we believe this work actually matters. Over the yesterday and today, we have discussed, right, that nationally determined contributions and national adaptation plans and adaptation indicators, and today we will dive into climate finance. But all these processes require common understanding of what is climate resilience. This framework is intended to provide that foundation, right? And is intended to support the implementation of the target on water and sanitation of the global climate resilience framework. It's intended for you to help you in countries to integrate water and sanitation into climate policies and also integrate climate into water and sanitation strategies, and also can help guide indicators and monitoring efforts. So the ambition is simple, is to help move from global agreements that we discussed yesterday to practical action on the ground and to accelerate progress towards climate resilient water and sanitation for all. And without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Anjani, back to Anjani, as she will give us some further insights on gender inclusion. Over to you, Anjani.
Thank you, Jose. Let me come back to gender, as Jose was saying, because we saw in your results this morning that it is still the least consistently integrated part of national plans. Almost half of you felt that it was only partially addressed or absent. And I want to hold that finding that you showed us yesterday alongside what's happening globally. Because the two of those data points tell us a useful story. Now, at the global level, there has been some progress last year on gender, and the task now is to carry that progress from global to the national level, where your results show the work still needs to be done. At COP30 in Belém, 3 things launched that together point us in the same direction and help us sharpen our policy, but also advocacy. And the first is the Belém Gender Action Plan, adopted by governments under the UNFCCC. It is a 9-year framework running from 2026 to 2034, with 27 activities across 5 priority areas. Now, in plain terms, what are those priority areas? These areas cover building skills and knowledge, getting more women into climate decision making, joining up gender work across the UN system, and putting it into practice, including in budgets and tracking progress. And for the first time, Belém Gender Action Plan, it names care work, health, and violence against women and girls, all 3 points of pressure in water and sanitation sector as well. Its first review is in 2029. So Belém Gender Action Plan is a political mandate. The second is SWA's own gender policy brief that we developed with the Institute for Sustainable Futures at the University of Technology, Sydney. And it was launched at COP30 Resilience Hub by Her Excellency Michelle Bachelet, who's our Global Leadership Council member and a former president of Chile as well. It sets out the evidence and what it takes to put gender at the center of water and sanitation adaptation. The third point is our updated definition and a response framework for climate resilient water and sanitation, the one Jose introduced earlier. Now, this definition and the response framework pays particular attention to the most exposed and vulnerable groups and connects climate risk assessment to action. So think of this definition and response framework as the operational link across the three that you see on the screen, and it carries the gender priorities set out in our brief and mandated to the gender action plan into actual design and delivery of services. Next slide, please. So how these three fit together? They are complementary instruments doing different jobs, but it is, as I said earlier, to support the policy and practice, but also the advocacy for our other non-government partners. Now, they share the same starting point. Women and girls carry a disproportionate share of water and sanitation burden, from collecting water and unpaid care to questions of safety, like the issues around sextortion in East Africa, but also menstrual health. All three instruments put that reality at the center, but they're doing different jobs. The Gender Action Plan sets the UNFCCC wide mandate and the reporting space for gender across nationally determined contributions, national adaptation plans, and finance. So it is not specific to a sector. But what's specific to our sector is the policy brief, which I talked about earlier, and the definition and response framework, which Jose introduced. So please do read those two documents carefully, and we'll paste the links to them in the chat. Now, the Bellum Action Plan opens the political space, and the SWA instruments give the sector something concrete to put it into practice or advocacy. What does that mean for you? When you review your national adaptation plans and or the nationally determined contributions, check whether gender differentiated impacts and the leadership of women and girls is actually visible in water and sanitation priorities, rather than simply assumed as cross-cutting issues. When you track finance, which you will do in the exercise later today, check whether gender-responsive budgeting is actually reaching water and sanitation and not only is part of a wider climate portfolio. And one point that is easy to miss, climate impacts on water and sanitation cause economic losses, as we know and as we see in the headlines, like damaged infrastructure and lost livelihoods. But they also cause non-economic losses that we rarely count, like health, safety, time, and lives. And these fall heaviest on women and girls. So if we only continue to count the monetary costs, we missed most of the picture. That's why we are bringing gender to the discussion today. Over to you, Jose.
Thank you so much, Anjani. That was a great compliment as well. So we've seen the definition, we've seen many of options that it's handy and you can make use. And then we've seen the importance of integrating gender. But now, as we move into the next segment, I would like to now introduce Sanitation and Water for All head of the country engagement. That's Kevin Russell. And Kevin Russell is going to give us insights about a very powerful, if I may refer to it as a tool as well, which is a head of state initiative, which is, in our view, the perfect element to bring, again, global agreements and global frameworks and global targets that we're discussing into a reality at the national and local level. So with that little intro, Kevin, over to you. We're looking forward to hear from the heads of state initiatives.
Thank you so much, Jose, for that introduction, and good morning, good afternoon, partners. So I have a wonderful task really to share with you the heads of state initiatives, which, I mean, you can call it a program, you can call it a range of things, but it's a great way to frame a way in which we can change things in the sector, move beyond the fragmentation, move beyond the silos towards integration and kind of climate resilience. So if I could just go to the next slide, please, Lucia. So the Heads of State Initiative, you may have seen this logo and wondered why somebody was copying SWA. Don't worry too much, it's us, but it's us with some other partners. the government of the Netherlands, the UK, UNICEF, IRC, and WaterAid, who've come together and said, how could we best bring our resources together to support countries to raise water, sanitation, and hygiene? And dare I say, not just raise water, sanitation, and hygiene, climate resilient water, sanitation, and hygiene to the highest levels. And so we've pulled our resources together to try to do a couple of things. And on to the next slide, please. Coming together, we've actually realized that what we can do is identify countries that are already taking a step. And we find that, presidents and prime ministers are making commitments to water, sanitation, and hygiene, and of course, making it a priority within their mandate. What tends to unite these efforts is the presence of not just the political leadership, but of course, the commitments made at the highest echelons of government. And that's great. It's great to have commitments. But then the question becomes, can you get quality commitments? Can you get commitments that deliver? So when we came together, we said, we need to create an initiative. We need to understand this movement, and we need to find a way in which we can best support it. And how could we do that? Really in two ways. Number one was to reinforce national partners and use our convening power to do two things: joint advocacy activities, and that advocacy includes, of course, capacity building, policy development, and the likes, and many of the documents that Jose was showing earlier, and then, of course, technical assistance where we had the resources to do so. I'm not going to go through all the countries, but just to give you an idea of the progression, from 2023 till now, about 31 countries have joined. The ones you see in bold are countries that have a compact, so they have some sort of initiative document signed by the head of state. And the others that you see in sort of italics and bold had a heads of state initiative. It's come to an end. There are also a couple of countries that are currently with very advanced drafts and ready to launch. On to the next one, please, this year. So what the heads of state initiative does is, as its mission, using political leadership to raise sector profile and use it as a catalyst for integrated development to achieve SDG 6. So that also, by extension, means that we worry about other SDGs, right? And why we do it? Because we want to work in a presidential way, in a demand-driven and government-delivered way to achieve scale, of course, increase finance, which my colleague James will speak about a little bit later. There's very much a system strengthening focus to the work we do, and very importantly, an equity focus. So making sure that gender is tackled correctly, making sure that those poor and marginalized and any form of vulnerable people in the world are not left behind as we work towards raising the delivery of SDG 6. Now, we work in multiple ways, but at this point, I think it's important just to talk about the headlines. It's the advocacy, which is done with the diplomatic element. We're very grateful to have two countries be part of the convening group. So, of course, we can rely on their support. I'm also delighted to say we have some additional countries joining soon. At the moment, I'm not in a position to put their logos up, but we will, at the course of the next 2 weeks, be able to announce some others. But I'll give you a little hint. I'd like to welcome somebody who's joining for the first time, Jose, Mr. Habu Jamilu, who's our new focal point from Nigeria. I know there are many others who are joining for the first time, so welcome to you too, but just recognizing the role that they play. And then, Jose, if at this point, I think it may be useful for me to hand back to you just to give some practical ways in which countries can integrate climate into it. And then you could hand back to me, and I'm going to tell you what's happening with the countries and the heads of state so far. But over to you, Jose.
Perfect, Kevin. I think this is a great teamwork. I will just take the floor momentarily and then give it back to you, Kevin. So in the next slide, please. We wanted to, maybe the next one. Here, thank you, Lucia. So one area in which we are increasingly providing you colleagues in country support is with the integration, right, of climate resilience into the heads of state initiatives. So our recommendation here is not to treat climate change as a separate topic or theme, but rather to bring it into the heads of state initiatives throughout existing national water and sanitation commitments. So first, we think that the heads of state initiatives should connect directly or explicitly to the Paris Agreement and the commitments that we saw yesterday made in National Adaptation Plans and nationally determined contributions, right? This will be a great way for you in countries to start implementing and operationalizing the global framework that we saw yesterday and the specific target on climate resilient water supply and sanitation. Second, we think that climate resilience should be considered within the Heads of State initiative as a core service objective along the same lines as universal access, safety, affordability, and also equity. A third point we wanted to make is that particular attention should be given to what we call the overlap of populations, right? Those are populations who are at the same time highly exposed to climate hazards and at the same time underserved, right? With low access to these basic services. A fourth point is that a stronger collaboration is needed between water and sanitation institutions, but also with climate authorities, disaster risk management agencies, and finance ministries. And finally, let me just say that climate resilience needs to be reflected in financing strategies, helping countries mobilize both domestic resources, but also climate finance for resilient sanitation services. So in short, climate resilience should not be beside national and water sanitation commitments. It should be integrated into how those commitments are designed, financed, and implemented. And again, I would like to emphasize we see the Heads of State initiatives as a key mechanism to bring global frameworks and targets into our reality in your own countries. Back to you, Kevin.
Thank you so much, Jose. If I could just have the next slide. What we're seeing right now within the Heads of State initiative, and of course there are 7 countries that, or more now, as you would have seen from the countries in bold, that already have compacts. There are also countries that have drafts, and there are countries that are developing them. But there's a continuum, and there's a continuum from countries that have almost minimal or no adaptation language to those that have probably the gold standard, where there's an explicit adaptation commitment with accountability. And ultimately, the end goal for us is that we would like to have climate resilient wash systems that ensure universal, equitable, and sustainable access for all, recognizing that we're in a changing climate, right? So there are many sort of things to consider what happens along this continuum. And what's good about the process of the Heads of State initiative is it's not judging countries and their decisions. It's about moving us along this continuum. Some countries that are now sitting in this pillar 5 that are very close to 6, they also started at pillar 1. It's a process that gets us to where we need to be. But ultimately, what we're looking for is countries that have time-bound, high-level commitments that explicitly embed climate adaptation into WASH and accountability mechanisms and financing. And if you want a good example of this, the Ghana Presidential Compact is very, very strong on this particular matter. And if you really want to get behind implementing and making that commitment happen, you know, Ghana, Dominican Republic, and Nepal right now are examples of really powerful compacts that take on the issue of climate very well. There are also compacts that are, you know, historical, like in India, Jal Jeevan and Swachh Bharat missions. These predate the Heads of State initiative, but they're also able to move beyond just having substantial programs to having these more time-bound, high-level commitments. And we're starting to see that now. India recently relaunched its Jal Jeevan mission, which is its mission on water. And in its new indicators, you can start to see much stronger kind of climate language. Now, what we're looking to do also is use the definitions. So Jose has spoken about that earlier. But what we're also finding is as countries develop their compacts, there are certain definitions that are emerging. So the little box at the bottom here that talks about how they see climate resilience, what they see as water security. But importantly, almost all of them talk about climate when they talk about circular economies and when they talk about, as they're doing now in Ghana, 24-hour economy. So there's an economic modus that is becoming really quite important and acting as a catalyst for moving countries away from minimal no adaptation language to kind of the point we want to get to on number 6. So I think this is something we will share with you, and I'm not going to go into too much more detail of it, but I think it's a good framework that you can look at to see where your country fits and how you can move maybe from number 3 to number 4. What we love about the Heads of State initiative, of course, is the acceleration. Once you're able to get a president and they bring a couple of ministers together, in all of the countries that have currently got compacts, there's a minimum of 9 ministries coming together at the time of the signing and the launch of a compact. So when you have that much kind of coherence at government with the president, it's even possible to move from number 1 to 6. So don't limit yourself to looking at this scale and going, I must go from 1 to 2. You can be much more ambitious than that with the Heads of State initiative. I have one last slide to share with you, and then hand back to my other colleagues. But what has come out strongly, if you pick all the different compacts that have come out and how they talk about climate and adaptation in particular, and how they move towards an integrated agenda, this would be the sort of statement that these countries are collectively making. And again, bearing in mind that some barely mention it and others mention it very strongly, what they are talking about in these things is that heads of states are committing to ensuring that national climate adaptation plans incorporate climate resilient water, sanitation and hygiene infrastructure and services, strengthening institutions, financing and governance systems to build resilience to climate variability, extreme weather events, water scarcity, and environmental degradation. So while ensuring, of course, sustainable and equitable access for all. Now, if your country hasn't developed a heads of state initiative, we would absolutely love to have some version of this statement advocated for inclusion in the final compact, because this is actually becoming probably one of the best. I think, Jose, maybe we'll need you just to add that bit you had about vulnerable populations. I thought it was really powerful. That hasn't come out yet in any of the existing compacts. But do use some of these compacts, do use this kind of statement maybe as a tool to consider getting something stronger in your future compact. But at this point, let me hand back to you, Jose. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you so much. This was really powerful. I think we're about to start a new segment of the workshop, but at the moment we've seen powerful tools and that you have to your disposal, which is a common definition, a menu of options in the form of an implementation framework. You have tools to integrate gender. You have a mechanism, which is this powerful heads of state initiative to bring global into national and local. And now we are starting a new segment. It's a segment that dives more into the financing part, right? For that, we have two speakers. First, we're going to start with our own colleague, James Stamper, who is the advisor on finance systems and accountability. And that's going to be followed. We are really lucky to have with us, thanks, Bapon, the key Green Climate Fund water representative is the water lead. Is late for you, Bapon, in Korea. We really appreciate your staying with us this late. So we have these two presentations. We will start now with James, and then we will hand over to you, Bapon. The next slide, please, if we can have, yeah. We cannot hear Lucia or Alessia. The audio is not coming through, at least for me. No, it's not coming through. The audio is not coming through, Lucia or Alessia. Now, we've got a little bit of some voiceover. If you can try again.
Hi, Jose. I'm here in person if you'd like me to talk to the slides.
As you like, as you like. It seems that the audio was not working. So if you can.
No problem. So sorry for all that, everyone's patience. Let's advance to the next slide. All right. Hello, everybody. My name is James Stumpert. I'm the Finance Systems and Accountability Coordinator with Sanitation and Water for All. So over the next 5 minutes, I'll provide a brief overview of the climate finance landscape, the principal entry points for water security and sanitation, and the practical steps country practitioners can take to engage. Next slide, please. So in 2023, the global climate finance reached approximately $1.9 trillion. So of that, 65 billion was directed toward adaptation, and just 49 billion reached water and wastewater. So approximately 2.6 of the total. Even though water is the primary medium through which climate change affects people, yet it reaches less than 3 cents of every climate finance dollar. So the key point is this: Water security and sanitation is formally eligible across all major funds, so including the Green Climate Fund, which Popon will speak to next, the Adaptation Fund, and the Global Environment Facility. The challenges is not eligibility, as we can see. Next slide, please. First, national climate planning. Water security and sanitation must appear explicitly in your NDC and NAP for proposals to be credible. Okay, so this is one of the first entry points that you have to look at when you're thinking about climate finance in your work. If that alignment does not yet exist with your NAPs and your NDCs, establishing it is your first priority. Second, resilient infrastructure. Water supply, sanitation, and drainage systems are eligible adaptation investments when designed to climate standards. So where infrastructure investments is already planned, the climate rationale is often already present. Third, the multi-sectoral project design, linking water security and sanitation with wastewater management, agriculture, or urban resilience, really tends to strengthen both the climate rationale and the funding potential. Finally, as I stated before, water security and sanitation is eligible but underrepresented. So the colleague speaking after me will address their fund directly, but the door is open. The gap, though, lies in proposal capacity, as I think he might allude to, but we'll see. All right, so next slide, please. Let's turn now to the challenges and requirements. There are 4 requirements to bear in mind. Actually, next slide. Should say time at the top, what it takes to access climate finance. There we go. Excellent. Thank you so much. All right, so now let's turn to the challenges and requirements. All right, there are 4 requirements to bear in mind. On time, the process from concept note to approval at a facility like GCF, for example, is measured in years. So early engagement is essential. On accreditation, proposals must be submitted through an accredited entity, typically a UN agency or multilateral development bank. Water ministries rarely qualify directly, unfortunately. So identifying an institutional partner is a necessary early step. On climate rationale, funds require qualified adaptation benefits, so a credible financing model and government co-financing. This demands real analytical work from across multiple ministries, which leads to the 4th point. Water, climate, and finance ministries must be aligned. So the National Designated Authority is the country's formal interface with GCF and the starting point for that coordination. So it is definitely worth underlining and worth highlighting that building a credible climate finance proposal also strengthens the sector's standing with other financiers. So the investment in capacity yields returns beyond just a single fund. If we can go to the next slide, please. Awesome. All right. So let me try and sum it up for all of you in 4 steps to take away from my presentation today. First, review your NDC and NAP, which we've already started doing in our yesterday's exercise, to confirm that water security and sanitation appears explicitly. If not, that is the first conversation to be having with wherever your climate finance or your climate ministry lies. Second, engage your National Designated Authority, your NDA. They are your country's formal gateway to GCF and other climate-related funds and can advise you on available readiness support. And third, identify an accredited entry operating in your country. An accredited entity operating in your country. So your NDA can provide that support to find out who they are. And then fourth, apply for readiness support. So GCF has approved more than 870 readiness grants globally. And if I'm not mistaken, there's no prior approval project is required to apply. So you can apply for readiness even if the formal project approval is not ready. And next slide, please. My next and last slide. Thank you. So before I close, I just want to leave you with a resource. SWA has published a case study that walks through this process in detail, including a worked example of how one country moved from national planning to a funded GCF project. You can use the QR code here, and if you aren't able to capture the link, we will include it in the resources that will be sent out after the workshop. So thank you very much for your time, and I will now hand the floor back to my colleagues to introduce the next speaker. Back to you, Jose.
Thank you so much, James. That was really, really good. And again, I would like now to introduce, we are lucky to have with us Mr. Bapon Fakhruddin, who is, as I mentioned earlier, is the Green Climate Fund Water Lead. So, Bapon, you've seen we have provided some key helicopter view insights, but if you want to spend a couple of minutes telling us a little bit your views into what is it that you're seeing when it comes into the proposals that you get from water and sanitation into the GCF? We know that you've done a great effort in providing guidelines for water security, specific annexes for development of sanitation proposals, for development of water and sanitation in general as well. So yeah, if you want to share with us a little bit your views on how things are moving, opportunities, challenges, that will be great. Bapon, over to you. Thank you so much.
Excellent. So thank you so much, Jose. I think James already provided that what are the in a overall guidance to accessing the climate financing or GCF financing. And you maybe know that the water is actually one of the largest portfolio, which is we call water security, which covers water security as well as sanitation. And we have a dedicated project preparation guides that are actually developed for water security as well as climate resilience sanitation system. So we always actually try to follow a 6x6x6 matrix. If you're really interested to design a more climate resilience sanitation or climate resilience water security programming. So looking at the thematic area where actually the GCF normally funding adaptation and mitigation, because water and sanitation actually goes with both sides. So you can always do a cross-cutting or a purely adaptation or purely mitigation. All are possible. We normally support a large chunk of our financing on infrastructure like water efficiency, water reuse, where the wastewater treatment plant, water supply, and many of those infrastructure activity comes. Secondly, looking at more on the risk-based decision making for water and sanitation side of it. So how actually you enhance the early warning systems and how that early warning systems actually create a risk-based policy planning into the Ministry of Finance to cascade to the Ministry of Water as well as utility services. Thirdly, looking at the governance aspect, where actually you try to look at the integrated water resource management, how the intersectoral actually works. Fourth one is more actually nature-based solution. And fifth one is a climate resilience sanitation. And sixth is a more knowledge bank. On a climate resilience sanitation side of it, I just like to emphasize here because this is one of the session here. Our pipeline is quite thin, and when we actually try to look at actually why these are actually thin pipeline, because we are a country-driven organization, so we cannot actually press caps from top down that, hey, country, you need to do a sanitation project, but its country need to come that, hey, we have a very innovative climate solution for our sanitation to reducing the mitigation side of it, emission or adaptation side of it, and how can actually we design such kind of things, rather than we see actually more actually a basic fundamental sanitation proposal comes, which is like a pit latrine or other services. But if you look at on the climate world, there are so many fascinating research has been done that the more climate smart sanitation product, how actually you can actually do the carbon credit for sanitation, how can actually you do the emission reduction, or how can you do the circular economy, which is quite emphasizing we now to the countries that how you look at more actually the sludge management with the municipal waste to create more circular economy, and so that actually the new entrepreneur or SME or MSME could actually have a opportunity to come and invest, or private sector could come play a critical role, and GCF could actually provide a de-risking environment to either in the physical space or a transitional space. Both are actually possible. So looking at this sixth thematic area, then it comes to actually how you can drive this to a pathway, because what are the mechanisms we can actually follow And that's where it comes. Actually, you need to consider these are as an asset class, so that actually it has a value. We try to respect as well as value our water, our sanitation, overall the infrastructure system. And then we provide a fit for purpose financing. So we are not an MDB or we are not a DFI. So we can actually maneuver the financing based on the needs on the country or based on the project that could create a market creation or a viable solution, a long-term paradigm shift. So if you want a grant mixed with a highly concessional loan, guarantee, equator, insurance, we can actually package those things according to the needs that the country required. And third one is try to look at actually the transboundary, which is more on the water side of it. Fourth, try to look at more on the governance again, that how you actually create a more dynamic standard operation procedure, planning, as well as regulatory function, so that actually it ensures that actually everything is actually correlated and coherence. And then the fifth one is looking at the innovation and policy integration, because often you may see, especially on the sanitation side, so many fascinating research has been done, piloting has been done, feasibility has been done, but it's never actually embedded into the national policy. And that's why it's never actually has an opportunity to scaling up. So unless actually you ensure that actually whatever tested has a benefit for the country, it needs to be embedded to the policy. And then finally, looking at the circularity, because these are all these are not a linear function. These are all has a circular functionality. So how can actually we support the circular economy in this part to make it more viable? And then finally, when it comes to the investment to the GCF, we follow a couple of 6 investment criteria, which is actually looking at impact potential, either mitigation to emission on the adaptation to the beneficiary of the vulnerable population. Secondly, looking at paradigm shift, that how the project is going to be sustained beyond the project life, looking at the SDG 17 goal, how actually you fit on that, and then look at more on the need-based solution, because as we said, we are a country-driven, so that means that all the need to become from the country, but it also need to embed it into ownership, which is a fifth one. So your NDC, NAP, National Development Plan, need to ensure that actually water or sanitation are a priority area that require financing for, especially on the climate financing, the vertical climate financing. And then the sixth one is looking at every dollar that you invest, what are the actually economic as well as financial benefit you bring. So if you're able to maneuver this 6x6x6 metrics in your thought process while you actually thinking your concept, and everything needs to be linked with climate change because it's a climate finance. So which means actually it's a function of what are the climate indices are actually creating a climate hazard, how that is exposed, and what are the vulnerability element you are talking about into water space or sanitation space. So that rationality is quite important. And if you're able to put this together in a drawing board and with consultation with your stakeholder, I think you can able to design a very good project proposal, which not only can actually satisfy GCF, but also other climate financer as well as other financer who are actually in the market. I'm happy to take any question that you may have, Jose. Thanks.
No, thank you so much, Papon. That was really, really interesting. What we have done to complement your intervention is to paste in the chat box the Green Climate Fund water security guidelines, including the annexes. And just to emphasize, Papon, you have emphasized that at the moment, climate resilient sanitation is lagging behind. You have explained your views as to why can that be. We are all trying to overcome this challenge. Bringing to the attention, there is an Annex 3 of Green Climate Fund guidelines that is dedicated fully to sanitation, both for adaptation and mitigation, as Bapon has emphasized as well. From our side, the Secretary of SWA has been in communication with the Green Climate Fund, and we thank you for your openness to receive always your views from the very beginning in the design of the guidelines. We have worked as part of the Climate Resilient Sanitation Coalition, which has been a key instrument that has been able to put a strong support to Bapon and the Green Climate Fund in actually the making of this Annex 3. So from our side, kudos to the way that the Climate Resilient Sanitation Coalition is moving, and we are a proud supporter of it. Bapon, I think we will leave it here because for the moment, obviously there's a lot of interaction in the chat box, but also because we are going to now go a little bit deeper because our next speaker is from Sri Lanka. It's the name is Nitlusa Lakmali. If we can have the next slide, and actually it's going to help us navigate something that has been already mentioned, which is the readiness windows, right? These are funds that the Green Climate Fund, as well as other funds, make available to increase the capacity at the country level and to move forward practically on enabling the environment at the country level to support a good and a strong project pipeline. So we're going to see in the next few minutes the specific inside out of a readiness proposal supported by UNICEF in Sri Lanka, obviously in coordination with all the country stakeholders that have been mentioned as a key instrument. But with that introduction, Nilusa, I could hand over to you just to let you know that we are lagging behind a little bit of the schedule. If you could please make sure to do the intervention, if possible, in 8 minutes, that would be appreciated as we will then move to a participatory exercise. Over to you, Nilusa.
Thank you, Jose. And it's a great opportunity. And yeah, let me start with the introduction, introducing objectives and activities of the project. Could you please move on the slides? Yes, so we were lucky to have the fourth readiness project in Sri Lanka for enhancing the climate resilience of water, sanitation and hygiene sector in Sri Lanka. First, I will explain the objectives and the activities very briefly, and then the key steps of the journey very quickly. Next slide. Next slide, please. Yes, the project value is 1 million for 2 months. Sorry, 2 years. The designation authority is the Ministry of Environment, and the UNICEF is the executive agency, the implementing partner of this project. This project has been approved in 2023. Next slide. The objective 1 is on the capacity building. Under the capacity building, I'm not going to go through all the content in briefly. It's to the build up the capacity of the relevant stakeholders in the sector, mainly to ensure that the adequate capacity and the systems and strengthen the networks, mainly for the planning, programming, and the implementation of the GCA funded activities. The next slide, please. Yes, so those are the key activities that we have developed under the capacity building element. So mainly to implement the climate risk assessment, the vulnerability assessment, and to develop the training material targeting the key sectors, the key sector agencies to undertake climate risk assessments, and then implement and roll out the training on how to undertake climate risk assessments, and then design and deliver technical sessions at the national level as well as the provincial level on climate finance, to give them the sense of the requirements and the existing opportunities. Next slide. The objective 2 is mainly on the strategic frameworks. And next slide. Because we have 4 objectives, and I will be very fast. And then, yes. So the activities are the design and the undertake capacity need assessment of the key institutions, because water sector is very much fragmented in Sri Lanka. The conduct assessments of the risk posed by climate change on water and sanitation services, as well as the groundwater resources as well. Even though the groundwater related agency is positioned under the other ministry, so we have since it's kind of the integrated approach, we have expanded our interventions to groundwater resources as well. Next slide. the conduct assessments of the groundwater monitoring systems in Sri Lanka, then the conduct risk assessments of 15 prioritized most vulnerable, the water and sanitation services to assess the risk of the climate change under variable climate scenarios and the climate risk, because we do have a number of climate risk in Sri Lanka. So based on that, we will do this risk analysis and to develop the robust climate rationale for climate resilient water and sanitation services. Next slide, please. Next slide. Then the undertake and review the climate, the policy analysis of the water sector, and mainly to review the action plan and the strategies to see to what extent that those have been aligned to the national action, the climate policy and the climate action plans as well, and to develop 5-year action plan to overcome challenges and risks posed by climate change on water and sanitation systems. So each activities are connected to each other. So that flow is very much, and the coherence is very much in this flow. Next slide, please. Conduct a national level workshop to review the gaps and knowledge and the goals sitting in the NDC, SNAP, and GCF for the water sector based on the policy analysis which was mentioned in earlier. Then convene the stakeholders from the water sector to conceptualize the project idea based on the climate risk assessments, the vulnerability assessments, capacity need assessments, and the policy analysis. So based on the results of that, we will move to the development of the project idea. Next slide. Next slide, please. Because the objective 2 has the significant amount of activities compared to the other objectives, the conduct and assessment of the appropriate low carbon adaptation solutions for identified climate risk and develop list of priority technologies and the technical solutions to overcome identified risk for the priority 15 water and sanitation systems, which is expected to assess. So based on that, this activity was built up. Next slide, please. Next slide. Conduct market need assessment among the government-led service supply agencies, mainly to focusing on the green skill development for climate resilient the WASH services as well, and develop a plan of action to address the needs of the service supply in water, sanitation, and the wastewater, recycle and reuse. Next activity, the objective 4 is on the pipeline development. Develop one concept node to mobilize climate finance resources for climate resilient water, sanitation, and services in the country. So this will be based on all the activities and all the exercises that we are planning to do under the readiness fund, especially under the evidence generation, the component as well. So collectively we are planning to develop one comprehensive concept node. Next slide. Then develop prioritize the project idea and to develop the concept node based on that, and also undertake the pre-feasibility study for the concept node. Next slide. Yes, this is the last objective. It's on knowledge sharing and learning to share the best practices. We are planning to share best practices at the national level as well as the provincial level with all key stakeholders involved in the process. Not only we will not focus on the water sector, but other relevant sectors as well. Then based on the documentation, the evidence generation, and other the studies we are, and based on our experiences throughout this process, we are planning to prepare and disseminate briefs and highlighting the best practices and the lessons learned for WASH services, mainly at the national and the subnational as well as the grassroots level as well, with the key ministries, especially the line ministries as well as the Ministry of Finance and other stakeholders. Next slide, please. So this is the implementation arrangement. This is the proposed the implementation arrangement. Next slide, please. Yes. So then still, honestly, we didn't receive funds, but we have the climate task force with the leadership of the Ministry of Water Supply to prepare the sector, even though we didn't receive. We are still in the we are planning to prepare the stage and the foundation to implement the project. So these are the list of the main stakeholders. You can see a lot of other relevant sectors are part of this, the climate task force members like the irrigation, agriculture, state sector, health, education, irrigation, the Ministry of Land, Livestock, and the public administration, home affairs. In addition to that, the planning department, national planning department, external resource department, and the Minister of Finance is also part of that. We have identified focal points from those agencies as well. Next slide, please.
If we can conclude, please, Nilusha.
Yes, yes.
Sorry to
Can we
interrupt.
go to the last slide so that then? Yes. So this is the last slide. So this is a kind of the long journey, because the key steps that we followed to come to this level is the consensus reaching with the key ministries as well as the NDA, emphasizing the needs and the financing gaps and the policy gaps, and to aligning to the existing the NDC targets of the sector and the NAP and so all the climate, the policies and the plans were aligning to this, the consensus reaching and the convincing, then the briefed the GCF and other funding mechanisms to the relevant line ministries, because for other ministries other than NDA, this subject is very new, the language is very new, because we had some pocket meetings, the common stakeholder meetings to brief about what GCF is, what other climate finance mechanisms existing in the and the possibilities of reaching them. Then the conduct informed meetings with those ministries to take the no objections, because we need to get their willingness first. And then we formed multi-sectoral technical working group first, because it was a very participatory the mechanism. Then the community level and the grassroots level consultations was done to develop the project idea. Then the project idea was transformed to project with the concept note and to the proposal, involved with the key stakeholders and the NDA to internalize the project idea, because that was one of the key steps, because to have a very the comprehensive, because otherwise the ideas can be keep from changing when you work with a very large and the very the wider range of the stakeholders. So that risk is also there. To avoid that, we need to have take their endorsement for the project idea first, and then the finalize the project design, proposal development with with relevant revisions with the stakeholders, NDA as well as the GCF as well, because we reached GCF to get the review and the technical support as well. And to make we make some relevances to the existing GCF approved projects as well, the previous readiness projects. So all linkages has to be shown in this whole project design, the climate policies, are the existing projects, are the development work of the sector within the scope of the climate change, climate resilience in the sector. Thank you so much.
Thank you to you. Thank you, Nilusha. We couldn't have a better way to try to break out a little bit the mysteries of these readiness windows by having such a good example, right, on how things look in a successful readiness proposal, even at the activity level, right? We have emphasized the readiness window is a preparatory set of interventions, right? You haven't seen the construction of infrastructure. We have seen market assessments. We have seen policy reviews and enabling the environment to provide your country, right, with the tools that you need in order to, as you have now shown, to move towards concept development and actual larger project proposal. Nilusha, that was really, really good. We really thank you for your insights, and we take good note of that. With that,
Thank you so much.
thank you again. And we commend for all the support that you are providing from UNICEF to Sri Lanka and your government and all the partners. We are moving now into the last segment, and it's the hands-on part of the workshop, because we're emphasizing this is a workshop and it's for you to also spend the time that you have reserved with us to also move things practically. We're going to move now into a similar exercise as we did yesterday through a survey, but let me walk you through very briefly as to what you will find when you start working in the next 10-15 minutes on this exercise. If I can have the next slide. In the form that we will share with you shortly in the chat, you will see that at step 1, you will be provided with a hyperlink that is going to take you directly to the Green Climate Fund website, specifically where you can find all the countries that are getting support from the Green Climate Fund. So we will ask you to click that. The link will be provided in the form, and then quickly locate your country. If I can have the next slide. Once, and we have the example of Indonesia on the screen, you will see something like that for your country. We will ask you to scroll down all the way down till you get into the part of the country website where it says documents. You will see that at that point, once you have scrolled down, you will get on the right side of the screen a set of filters that you can apply to these documents. The next slide. These filters will look different for each country depending on the documents available. But in most of your countries, you will find the filter with approved funding proposals. You will find the filter to readiness proposals, such as the one that we have just seen, and concept notes. The survey is going to ask you, you can click simultaneously these 3 filters or one by one. And then it will, once you apply the filters, you will get a shorter list of documents, which we ask you to scan quickly and see, for example, if we could apply these filters for Indonesia, we would see, in the list of documents, one that I have highlighted that refers to climate resilient water infrastructure. And later on, it refers to integrated watershed management. So this is the exercise to quickly do and then answer the questions in the survey. Just the next slide. This is the way that your survey looks like. It's a bilingual form in both English and French. So please start working with it. You will see you need to fill in your email. You will need to fill in a couple of questions, the country, and then you will get the hyperlink there to start locating your country and applying the filters so that you can answer the questions. We will give you the next 12 minutes to work on this. And as always, you can have questions in the chat box that we will try to solve. We let you work for the moment, and I will be reminding you of the time remaining, as well as we will start soon seeing some results once you have had the time to go through this. We will show some other results live as we get them through the survey. But obviously we understand you need some time to digest this, to go to the website, apply the filters, and start screening things. We hope by this time you have already had a chance to open the survey, that you have start filling in, and that soon you are going into the website where you can locate your own country and start seeing which documents are available for your own country. Our main aim today, obviously, is not that you go through all the documents, but that you get familiar on how to access the GCF website for your own country and start getting familiar with key documents already available, that you start to see if funding proposals in your own country have been successful in relation to water and sanitation, whether they have been successful for energy, for all the thematic areas. In the next few minutes, you will see that we're trying to link up to the exercise yesterday as well, because we are asking you at the very end of the survey whether some of the priorities that you identified yesterday in your national adaptation plans or nationally determined contributions actually have made it and qualified already for finance, climate finance, or if not, we are hinting you that those are there to be financed yet, and somebody needs to take care of those priorities that you identified yesterday. We still have 7 minutes to continue working on it. We are starting to receive some responses from Nepal, Pakistan, Liberia, Madagascar, Nepal, and DRC for the moment. Thanks for those. We ask you to continue working on it, using the filters, scanning quickly which sort of proposals have made it in your own countries at the moment. Try to identify any proposal or concept note or readiness that refers to water and sanitation. We're even getting some answers in terms of specific proposals that have been successful in different countries. And also some of you are getting to the masterclass question, which is the last one, in terms of whether what you identified yesterday as a priority got to the point of being now a successful proposal. Thank you, Lucia, for walking us through the different questions and the answers we are getting. We have 4 or 5 more minutes to continue working on this. Again, when scanning through it, try to have in mind what you discovered yesterday, that are the priorities in your national adaptation plans and nationally determined contributions. See if any of those priorities you identified yesterday somehow correlate now with proposals that have been funded or concept notes or relate to the readiness window that we have discussed in terms of enabling the environment in your countries. This is how we bring together the exercise from yesterday and today's exercise. And certainly this is a little bit rush for you to do, but this is the thinking that we would like to foster, right? Identifying priorities, national priorities in climate policy, and seeing who is taking care of those priorities and whether they are qualifying for climate finance. This is the thinking that we want to trigger. We are getting now a higher number of responses. Thank you so much. We see Lucia for question 2, if you can scroll a little bit. Question 3, in terms of concept notes, or in terms of approved funding proposals, we see some blue there. We see concept notes as well, readiness proposals. We see a quarter that have identified readiness proposals for water and sanitation. We see some specific ones, initiatives and proposals that you have already pasted in the chat, in the survey. Climate resilient water supply services in Rwanda, Uganda READ for results, UNOP sanitation and hygiene communities vulnerable to climate change. So we see some successful proposals that you are already bringing to our attention through the survey. And again, we see if we do the matching of the exercise yesterday and today, you see some of you, 33%, identified that there is a correlation between the priorities you identified yesterday and things being funded through climate financing today. This is good. I would say 33% is not a bad signal. Also partially aligned. Gonna spend the next 1 minute and 2 minutes to try to wrap the exercise up. We'll give you 1 more minute before we start concluding this 2 days workshop. We got now 20 responses from a large number of countries from Asia and Africa. Including different responses from different countries. We have obviously colleagues from the same country joining at the same time. Thank you very much, Lucia, for walking us through that. If we can see the question 2, we got in terms of approved funding proposals, we see more than 40% of proposals being identified for water and sanitation. In terms of concept notes, which is the question 3, we see a large number of concept notes that relate to water and sanitation. This is a good sign. These concept notes are later on qualifying probably into finance proposals. If we can see the question 4, Lucia. Not sure if you can scroll down. Thank you. In terms of readiness proposals, such as the one we've seen for Sri Lanka, we see a little bit less. We see 28%. Then we have a question 5 with the observations that you are pasting, which we will analyze. And then the last question, which is question 6, is this wrapping up question. for which now what we got through all the responses is 33% of you identified synergies between the exercise yesterday and what you are analyzing today. It's 36% now. With that, I'm going to hand over to our head of policy at the Secretariat of SWA, Anjani, for you to then help us conclude and finalize this 2 days journey.
Thank you so much, Jose. And as we close 2 days together, let me try to summarize them, although there's a lot of ground that we cover. We began yesterday with a bigger picture on adaptation and what it means for our sector. And for the first time, the Global Adaptation Agenda names water and sanitation directly, with a dedicated target, and since Belém COP30, the indicators to measure progress. And today, we turned to delivery. We agreed on what climate-resilient water and sanitation services actually mean and how to build them. We looked hard at gender and why women and girls belong at the center of this work and not as afterthought. We saw how heads of state initiatives can carry it across government as integrated policy making and sustainable financing needs political will from the highest level of decision makers. And we spent some real time on finance. On finance, one message stands out. Our sector is eligible across all major climate funds, but still receives a small fraction of what flows out. The gap is not eligibility, it is capacity. And the way through is practical. Make sure water and sanitation are clearly in your national climate plans, NDCs and NAPs. And also find your designated authority for climate finance. Use the readiness support that is there for asking. Sri Lanka is doing it, drawing on GCF readiness funding to strengthen the climate resilience of its water and sanitation sector. GCF also highlighted that climate resilient sanitation is lagging behind, so we have our work cut out as the sector. So my ask as you leave is a small one. Take one of these steps in the week ahead. Open your National Adaptation Plan or nationally determined contribution if you don't have the National Adaptation Plan, or find out who your climate finance gateway is. That single action is where many strong proposals begin. So thank you to every one of our speakers across these 2 days and to all of you for your engagement. Please stay connected with SWA to carry forward this work. Thank you so much and bye for now.